listening to us here. We are coming to you live from the Montserrat Cultural Center. And we are having today a town hall meeting during which we will be discussing the Montserrat Social Security Fund. My name is Peter W.A. White, and I was asked to chair this evening's proceedings, so I will do so to the best of my ability. Before we get started, I'd like to invite my colleague, Mr. Gentil Skerritt, to come forward and offer a word of prayer. Mr. Skerritt.
Bow your heads. Kind and Heavenly Father, we thank you for bringing us here this evening to discuss the Social Security and the challenges we're having. Dear Father, we ask you to let this conversation be fruitful, and we ask you to let anyone who is on their way here this evening, Lord, to come here safely, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Skerritt. The purpose of this meeting, or this town hall meeting, is geared towards informing and engaging the public on the state of the Montserrat Social Security Fund and the different options that are currently being before government for consideration to address the issues that the funds are facing at this time. We welcome those who are sitting here in the auditorium this afternoon, and persons can also join us via the Government Information GIU Facebook page, where the meeting is currently being streamed live and will be rebroadcast at some point in the future. We are also on the Government of Montserrat GIU YouTube channel, and I'm told that we are streaming live on the local cable Digicel cable network, channel 96, where the meeting is also being broadcast. You can also join us on the Government of Montserrat website at www.gov.ms, and you click on GIU, and you should be able to see the proceedings here this afternoon. For this afternoon's town hall meeting, the panelists who will be making contribution this afternoon, we have the Honorable Premier. We have also the Chairman of the Montserrat Social Security Fund at present, Mr. Kenya Lee, representing the Ministry of Finance. We have the Managing Director of the Social Security Fund, Mr. Kenneth Scotland. Joining us virtually, we have Mr. Derek Osborne, who is an insurance actuary, and we may have presentation as time goes on from other members of the board as required. For completeness, I will inform you that the current members of the Social Security Board, Mr. Kenya Lee, as I mentioned before, is the chairman. We have Mrs. Lorraine Lewis, Deputy Chair, Mr. Joseph Irish, Miss Michelle Castle, Mr. Peter Queeley, and Miss Lovetta Silcott. Permit me at this time to give you a bit of a background as to what we're going to be discussing here this evening. The Montserrat Social Security began operations in 1986, or thereabout. 86. 1st of July, 86. That's good. And prior to its inception, the Montserrat National Providence Fund system was in place. Social Security currently covers all employed and self-employed persons and offers three main types of Social Security benefits: short-term benefit, long-term benefits, or pensions and employment injury benefit. The system is financed by contributions which are levied on employment earnings up to a wage ceiling and are paid by the employers, employees, and self-employed persons. The revolving fund that fuels the operation of the Social Security are invested locally and overseas in various types of securities and properties investment. The Social Security Fund has previously informed government of its challenges, or the challenges that it has experienced, which would have serious impact on its ability to meet its obligations, as the fund is projected under current operations to be depleted between now and the next 3 to 4 years. Based on actuarial advice, the fund made the following recommendations to the government of Montserrat: to give consideration to increasing the contribution rate and adopt a schedule of additional increases in the coming years. The other one is gradually increasing the age at which reduced age pensions are payable, while at the same time increase the reduction factors. Another one is to reduce the minimum age of invalidity pension percentage and see how best that could make some savings for the fund. Government of Montserrat is also being asked to inject additional funds into the Social Security Fund in the short term to help offset recurring or the increasing deficits. These are some of the recommendations that our meeting this evening will focus on. We will begin first by hearing presentation, first from the Premier, then from the Chairman of the Board, then the Managing Director, and hopefully Mr. Osborne once he's still with us, virtually. And then after that, those brief presentation, we will take questions from the audience. In the hall, we have a microphone set up for that purpose, so those who are here in the auditorium can use the microphone to raise their questions. Persons listening to us overseas or away from here will be invited to send their questions via WhatsApp at 664-496-2885. If you're watching us on YouTube or online, you can also write your questions in the chat or comment section of the live stream on the GIU YouTube channel or on Facebook. We expect you to listen diligently to the presentations, and if you have questions, please ask, because this is one of the opportunities where you can have clarity and have some level of influence in how things are addressed. It was just brought to my attention that the order in which I announced the presentation is not quite correct. In that, we will go virtually first to Mr. Derek Osborne, who is an insurance actuary. And he, in this capacity as an insurance actuary, will provide advice on how we go about assessing the risk, which would help the case of the Montserrat Social Security Fund in arriving at estimation or appropriate estimation for contribution to be made by members of the fund that will in turn guarantee their pension for the future. I wouldn't get into any more technicality. I now cross over to Mr. Nigel Osborne. Please, sorry, Mr. Derek Osborne. Yes, indeed. The Osbornes can be confusing sometimes. Yeah, so Mr. Derek Osborne, please indicate that you're hearing us.
I'm hearing loud and clear, Mr. White, loud and clear. Can you hear me?
Yes, we're hearing you, and we now yield to your presentation.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. White, and good afternoon, good evening, good night to those further afield. Mr. Premier, honorable ministers who are in the audience, and chairman and board of the Social Security pensioners, of course, and contributors, and the wider listening audience. It's really good to be with you this evening. As Mr. White just mentioned, the Social Security Fund is facing some challenges. And my role this evening is to set the stage as to a little bit of history, where exactly the fund is today, and what the options are for ensuring that the fund can make its promises as time goes by. If you think about what the fund has promised our contributors and pensioners, is once they turn 60 or 65, there'll be a pensioner for life. And if they're young and they get sick or have a baby, there'll be a benefit for them. And so the goal is to ensure that we can meet those promises as experience unfolds along the way. Can everyone see my screen? Mr. White, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
I'm going to assume. Repeat that, please.
Yes, we can see your screen. Proceed.
Okay, great. So I'm going to proceed. I won't be too long. So at the end of the day, the fund is actually nearing a crisis stage. Because as things stand today, there could be no cash left in the fund in about 5 years' time. And so this first slide highlights some experience and some history. So there's no surprise for those of us who've been around for a while, because we've seen this coming. Once the population shrank and the workforce shrank, the pension age population did not change. Actually, it went up. And so we have an increasing population of pensioners for a constant population of contributors, as we see at the bottom of the slide here, right? So 5 years ago, we had a 3.3 contributors for every one pensioner. Now it's 2.2. So we've lost essentially a whole contributor relative to one pensioner getting a pension. In the last financial year, ended March 31st, the deficit was over $3 million. And for the last 5 years, the average was $3.1 million in deficit. The size of the reserves right now are only 2.7 years worth of expenditure, which means that if we stop collecting contributions, there's only 2.7 years of benefit left to get. That's a real serious situation. And along the way, we've made recommendations, most of which have not, and those were designed to enhance the fund sustainability, and many of them are not implemented. And so hopefully today, I'll share with you some key recommendations again, and hopefully we can get some quick action through stakeholder discussions, and then through government approvals, we can have those implemented sooner rather than later to ensure that we can keep those pensioners who look forward to that monthly check happy. I'll say one thing finally. So at the end of the day, there are only two ways of really boosting sustainability. One is to increase income, and the other is to reduce our costs. On the income side, we can do the contribution rate. If we have assets, we can invest, hopefully at a higher rate of return. And thirdly, as a last resort, we can depend on government for subvention. On the expenditure side, of course, we can cut benefits, pensions, and reduce admin costs. So here are a few colorful slides that show you exactly what the financials look like for the last 6 years. As we see on the top left, contributions are less than benefits every single year. There's a $500,000 shortfall on that regard in 2016. It was 2.7 million last year. So the contributions have been flat, but benefits have been increasing. On the investment income, the yellow bars, as you see, the blue bars, investment income, they've been lower than admin costs. So we're not even able to pay our admin costs with investment income. There's a shortfall between contribution benefits and a shortfall between admin costs and investment income. And together, that has led to deficits, as we see at the bottom left, of over $3 million in 4 of the last 6 years, right? And when you keep running deficits, your reserves are going to keep decreasing. And as we see here, we were $41.5 million in 2016, and now it's down to $26.1 million at the end of March 2021. And to make it even worse, the budget estimation for this coming year is a $3.9 million deficit. And again, contributions are probably going to be flat, but benefits are going to increase year over year. So we have a fund, and the fund is about $26 million or $27 million worth of assets. These charts show exactly where that money is. So on the top left, we have equities, there's some cash and deposits, some bonds and loans. On the right-hand side on top, we have international, that's outside the region, making up almost half of the fund. 41% is local, and 12% is with two OECS governments, being Dominica and St. Kitts Nevis. In terms of the local investments, we see we have $3.1 million in Bank of Montserrat, $2.7 million in the credit union, and $1.2 million in various loans. There's MUL, there's PIU, and there's one other loan that I can't remember right now. So it's a mixture of cash and deposits and loans. On the overseas front, most of the money, which is almost half of the fund, is in equities and some bonds managed professionally by an outside investment manager. There's some, as I mentioned, some government bonds in St. Kitts and Nevis, equities within the OECS, and then there's a large deposit with a bank in the OECS. So it's a mixture of cash and bonds and equities, but at the end of the day, we're going to need cash to pay benefits 4 or 5 years from now, right? The building a little bay, probably worth $10 million, is not going to help us pay pensions, right? The government of Dominica and St. Kitts bonds that mature in 2032 is not going to help us pay pensions. So we're going to have to call, first of all, on the cash. That's a government, a Bank of Montserrat, sorry, and that's a credit union. The question is, can we call on $6.4 million at those institutions and not affect the local economy by withdrawing those funds from their reserves? If we look at where the benefits now go, 91% of all expenditure is for one benefit, and that's the pension to those, we call age benefit, the pension to the elderly. Right? So at the end of the day, what this shows is that if we want to make meaningful change, it could only happen to one benefit. Adjusting sickness or maternity or injury or invalidity of survivors won't make a big difference. At the end of the day, we're going to have to find a way to reduce the long-term cost of age benefit. And the options presented here include eliminating the early pension. 5-6 years ago, we introduced early pension when the age was increased from 60 to 65, so that no one qualifies before 65. That's one option. Another one is to keep the early pension, but make it smaller. So it's essentially, we're going to increase the reduction factor at the beginning so that people get less for the rest of their life. Another one is to prevent people who continue to work beyond age 60 when they claim the benefit to collect the pension. So I turn 60, I claim Social Security, I get my pension, but I keep working at the same or higher salary. It's nice if it's you, but it's very costly for the system. And so the idea is to eliminate pensions payable to people who keep working, especially for a certain amount. Another option which affects pensioners is don't give them increases. They haven't gotten one for a while, but from time to time, adjustments have been given to pensioners. And the final one presented here is increasing what will be 65 soon to 67. Today in Barbados, the normal pension age is already 67, and many countries around the world are moving to higher ages, such as 67 or even 70. In terms of contributions, right, that's our source of income. This particular chart shows that Montserrat has the second lowest contribution rate around the region. Right? We are the worst funded of all the schemes today. in terms of assets compared with expenditure, but we have the lowest or second lowest contribution rate next to the best funded scheme in the region, which is the BVI. So we have the lowest rate trying to support a small fund and growing obligations. Right? We see rates of the blue charts are OECS countries. Right? So Anguilla, St. Lucia at 10%, Grenada, St. Kitts Nevis 11%, Dominica is 13.25, gradually going to 15%. Antigua Barbuda is now 14. Right? Outside the OECS, we have Trinidad and Tobago at 13.2%, Guyana at 14%, and Barbados at 18.25%. Barbados made some reforms 15 years ago, and they raised their rate from 14% to 18.25%. In the same vein we're talking about now, to enhance sustainability and ensure that we can meet obligations as time passes. So what are the recommendations that we believe are going to give us the best bang for the easiest way to achieve what we want to achieve? Number one is the contribution rate. As mentioned earlier, we believe that 15%, although it still won't be enough, probably 5, 10 years from now, that will definitely be the place to start, with allowing income to increase with higher contributions from both employers and employees, but in phases, not a 6% jump right away, but we think 2%, even if it's not this year, definitely January next year would be a good time to start. And then thereafter, 1% each year until we get to 15%. As I mentioned earlier, Dominica is going to 15, and I'm sure several others are going to be on that path very soon to get to 14, 15% contribution rates, just so that they can continue to meet the obligations that they've promised. The second recommendation, as I mentioned, is to eliminate the early pension. That's been a challenge where we have almost everybody who turns 60 claiming early. They get a reduced amount, yes, but they're still claiming early. And so the idea is to either eliminate that or to increase the reduction factors so that the pension becomes so small that they really think twice about taking it early or waiting until they start working at 62 or 64 and then they claim the pension. The third recommendation is to suspend pensions for pensioners who go back to work or keep working. So if I turn 60 and I keep working, then I'm not allowed to claim the benefit yet until I stop working. Another way, and like a middle point way, is to say you're allowed to work, but only for a certain amount, right? So we don't want people who are, especially the lower income spectrum, to be prevented from maintaining their living standard if they turn 60, but not working for the same regular wage as they were before. So it's possible to have an in-between option where we can allow people to work, but for no more than a certain dollar amount per week or per month. And the final recommendation, and this one really is easy because no one yet in Montserrat has earned enough contributions to qualify for the maximum 60% benefit rate. The maximum today for somebody who worked from July 1st of 1986, 35 years ago today, until last week, is 53%. And so by changing from the maximum possible to 55%, by the way, Antigua is 50% maximum, so we won't be alone there. That change affects nobody, and it could be done very, very easily. So that's my remarks. I remain available to take questions after other speakers have presented. And so thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to a good discussion following all of the presentations. Over to you, Mr. White.
Thank you very much, Mr. Osborne. Just to update everyone that this town hall meeting is also being carried live on ZJB. Just a reminder as well, if you have comments or questions, you are encouraged to send them via WhatsApp to 1-664-496-2885, or you can also insert them on the GIU YouTube or Facebook channel that is showing this live as well. And Miss Fiona Alexander is here pulling together all the questions so that when we get to question time, she will present them on your behalf. We now turn to a presentation from the Honorable Premier. Honorable Premier.
Thanks for coming out and thanks for listening wherever you are. Listeners would remember that in my budget statement of 2020, I highlighted the importance of us doing something to the Social Security Fund in order to save it. COVID came along, and in-house we have been talking and preparing. And early on this year, I wanted to talk to the public to get the public's view on it. I invited the opposition to talk to us, and then we decided to have these town hall meetings to hear from you as well. In 1986, when the visionaries saw the need for a fund, a safety net for persons when they retire, they introduced, before that, the Provident Fund, of course, and then the Social Security Fund. At that time, persons who were non-established workers then retired from the service with an ex gratia payment, 2 or 3 years living money, and many were living in dire need and poverty. Many of you would recall that at that time, before that, government was giving $60 to persons who were on their welfare list. And you understand what that meant then. So I think that the people who actually spoke and had the vision to introduce the Social Security Fund were thinking way ahead of us. And I certainly thank them for that. Last year, I happened to receive a copy of the 8th actual report. I read through it, and it was frightening, and I'm sure many of you would have seen it and read through it. I met with the board and Mr. Osborne to discuss the seriousness again of it. And I'm convinced in my heart, and my team, my members of my team, that we need to do something. And this is not playing politics. This is people's livelihood. And I want us to understand that. And I want us also to understand, as contributors to the fund, let us not look at the fund or the contribution as just another expense. Let us look at it as a savings, an investment for the future. That's how we have to look at it. If you look at it as paying out money, it's not going to help us. Consider it as an investment for the future. And so we have looked through and discussed the recommendations from the actual report. As a matter of fact, another actual report is due, I think, next year, if I'm not mistaken. This year. And I guess they'll tell us the same thing, or maybe even worse in terms of the figures. My administration is committed to do something. I know that, and in-house within my group, we have said some people leave the hard and dirty work for us to do. But we are elected to make decisions. And we understand that by modifying or adjusting the rates and whatever they are, they will create a level of hardship for some people. But sometimes we have to encounter that hardship now so that we can exercise some joyful or some ease down the road. And I know that conditions, these things should have been challenged, should have been taken care of some years ago, but they weren't. And I'm not going back in the past. What I'm committed to do, my government and I, is to do something to the Social Security Fund. I have one regret. I'm not sure where we are, but I know when in 2010, 2011, thereabout, we had suggested that we gradually increase the pension age from 60 to 65. I'm not sure where we are right now. And if we haven't reached that stage, if it wasn't enshrined in legislation, then clearly it's something for us because that should have been done. However, we are going to do something, but we want to hear from you because you are the contributors to the fund. You know what you are making, you know what you can contribute, and decisions will be made. Government is also committed to speak to our funding partners. We have done that in January in a farm. They are aware, they have a copy of the actuarial report, so they know exactly what we're asking. We're asking FCDO to provide us with an annual contribution to the fund, and we have outlined to them, I've also written to the minister, outlining to him the urgency and the importance of that contribution. Whatever happens, government will have to inject some money into the fund for a period of time. And that's a commitment. So I don't have much more to say because it's for you to tell us, talk to us. Mr. Osborne, thank you very much. He has been on board with us. We have spoken to him. He's our advisor. He is the insurance person. He understands what it means. And you cannot allow the fund to die. That is not an option. Doing nothing is also not an option. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Premier, for your contribution. Just a reminder, if you're joining us late and you're wondering what is going on here at the Cultural Center, we're having a town hall meeting which is geared towards informing and engaging the public on the state of the Montserrat Social Security Fund and hearing about the different options that are currently before the government for consideration. We would have had before a presentation from Mr. Derek Osborne, the actuary. We just heard from the Honorable Premier from a government's point of view. And we now call on the chairman, corporate chairman of the board of the Social Security, Mr. Kenya Lee, to make his presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. I don't have a specific presentation to make. I would have taken up the chairmanship of the Social Security Board in January of this year, and I would have been a board member for 2 years now. I would have been unaware of the situation the fund found itself in until I joined the board several years ago. And as the Ministry of Finance rep on the board, I would have immediately brought it to the attention of the sitting government at the time, and did so as well when the new administration came into power. The situation that the fund finds itself in was basically inevitable after the exodus of a majority of the population back in 1997. It is, as a board member and the chairperson, it is unfortunate that we find ourselves in the situation that we are in now, but I must also stress that the Social Security staff and its board has done as much as I think possible to curb the administration costs on our end. The administration costs are high, yes, but like most institutions of this nature, there are statutory requirements that in order to operate a fund like this. So even if you had a population of 5 million, you would still need a certain structure and a certain level of administrative separation of duty and powers in order for a fund like this to function. So while the administrative costs are relatively high compared to the revenue, the fund, the management has done its best in order to curb those costs. And I think to an extent that any more curbing would be detrimental to the operations of the fund. That being said, we are pleased as the Social Security Board to have the commitment by the government of Montserrat in taking some of the recommendations on board and in partnership to see the sustainability of the fund extended for as long as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lee. You would have touched on your point from the board point of view, and you would have also touched on what we were expecting the managing director to touch on, which is matters related to administrative costs and management of the fund. So I don't think there's any need for us to hear that presentation from him at this time. Just a reminder to those who are listening and watching us, please send your questions via WhatsApp to 664-496-2885. We now get to the point where we'll take questions. And again, just to remind you who are here to address or to try and answer your questions, we have Mr. Derek Osborne, who would have presented from an actuarial point of view. We have the Honorable Premier, who spoke from the government, sitting government's point of view. And we heard from Mr. Kenya Lee speaking on behalf of the board and the management team. So first, I will ask if there's anyone within the hall at this time who have a question that they would like to ask. There's a microphone situated in the center of the hall. Please come forward and ask your question, if you have any at this time. In the meantime, Ms. Fiona is in the process of compiling those that came in via WhatsApp and other social media. So while we wait for someone internally to come to the microphone, I will ask Ms. Alexander to refer to one or two questions she will receive so far.
Right. Okay, so we have one question here, well, it's a comment rather, followed by a question. We can't afford an increase in the rates of our withholding. The rates are already high. Consider a defined contribution as opposed to a defined benefit scheme. Also, how about moving toward a new paradigm where two individuals manage their own program? I think that should be where an individual would manage their own program. Is that clear?
Okay, Mr. Osborne, did you hear that?
Yes, I'll take those questions.
Yes.
Okay. So around the world, Social Security has been about 100 years now, when it first started in Europe back in the early 1900s. And there was a move in Chile probably 40 years ago now to go the defined contribution approach, where each person essentially managed their own savings or managed their own fund. And it didn't work. You know, the short story, the challenge is that some of us live long, some of us die early, some of us have high income, some low income, some get sick, some are healthy forever, right? And at the end of the day, the concept of pooling, the concept of everybody putting in and being able to take out when it's your turn to get, certainly works well. And it provides that guarantee of a certain level of income, regardless of what your health status is or what your income level is. So there's a role for a national pension system, and it's been proven now, I mean, because it's been tried and failed in certain countries, that the defined contribution approach to a national pension system does not work. It does work for private pensions and employer relationships, but it does not work for national pension systems. And similarly for self-managing, you know, we have people who, I'm sure we know, got a big lump sum, a big gratuity when they left a certain job, and then 3 years later they're broke, right? Where some people had a business and made money afterwards. So it varies, and there's a role for governments to ensure that is a basic standard of living that their residents can live on and don't cause hardship to others. So there's a role for Social Security, and there's a role for the private sector, there's a role for the individual. And so we firmly believe that the design, although it might be considered old, it can be tweaked. The design of defined benefits and they have a ceiling that limits the level of coverage and lifetime pensions is certainly the best design for Montserrat and around the world as well.
All right. Over to you again, Ms. Alexander. Any other thing?
Yes. What is the average pension payout per person at the moment? What is the average pension payout per person at the moment?
Scotland, can I divert that one to you? Yes.
Mr. Scotland.
Good afternoon. The average, I could give a range of our pension payout in that it starts with a minimum pension of $307.65. I got that right. And I think our highest pensioner right now is $1,738 per 1793. And this is paid every 28 days. So in actual fact, if you want to get a monthly rate, you'd have to multiply it by 13 and divide by 12. So when you do that, you find that the monthly pension is more than what I just quoted. But the average, it varies. So I would say average about 7 something for 28 days. But I take away the minimum and the highest and the average, the mean. It's about that.
Just repeat the lowest again, you said.
307.69. 65, I say, first I right. She did with the evidence, you know.
Yes. Thank you very much. And just to be clear, so everyone who's receiving a pension would receive between the range of $307.65 up to, as I said, the highest, 1,793. And the question that comes in on that one is, what is the lowest contribution and what is the highest contribution you receive on a monthly from anyone who's paid?
The highest contribution is 160 for the individual. If combine the two together, the individual and the employee, it would be $360. It's basically, the ceiling is 4,000, so it's 9% of 4,000. Split 5% for the employer and 4% for the employee. And again, the lowest again is not a fixed because it's based on your salary. Because if somebody even get $10, they pay social security contribution. So it depends on your salary. But the highest is you can't go no higher than that. If you work $6,000 a month, you pay contribution and $4,000.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scotland. So that's to put this in layman's term. On any given month, we receive the highest contribution into the fund on behalf of a specific employee, that is the employee's contribution and employer's contribution of $360. You further state that on any given 28 days, while not everybody who receives that, but the highest pension that's paid out in any 28 days is $1,793. Therefore, I'm no great expert in maths, but looking at what you're saying here, for the highest person who receives a pension and the highest contributor, it requires 4 high contributors or more to pay one person pension. We heard from Mr. Osborne that if contribution stops today, the fund as it is, based on what is being paid out monthly, cannot last beyond 3 years. I think he said 2.something years, 2.7 years. That is the magnitude of the problem that we are facing. I encourage you, those who are listening, and those who are assembled here in the hall, to come forward and ask your questions and make your contribution so that you could have a full and clear understanding of the challenges we face with the Social Security Fund. Ms. Alexander, do you have any more questions?
Yes, I do. What is the average amount on the bottom end and top end if the contributions were raised by 2% in January? What is the average amount on the bottom end and top end if the contributions were raised by 2% in January? That would require some calculations, or, okay.
Mr. Osborne, how are you on that end? Are you able to say something on that one?
So on the maximum end, so the ceiling is now $4,500 a month, or is it 4,000? I forget. 4,000 a month, right. So assuming a 1% share between employer and employee, at $4,000 per month, it would be $40 a month more for the employer and $40 a month more for the employee for 1%. And at the lower end, if somebody makes, let's say, $500 a month at the very low end, it would be $5 a month for the employer and $5 for the employee for a 2% total increase.
Right. Encouraging those within the hall to come forward with your questions or suggestions. There's an open mic. Please feel free to do so. So we go back to...
Okay, we
Yes.
have, let's take...
Do we
someone.
take one while the person make the way to the
Okay.
screen? Yeah.
If the fund employs one of the measures explained or recommended, how will it secure the longevity of the fund for those coming behind? In essence, how do we ensure we do not end up back here in 20 years?
Okay, and Mr. Osborne, are you in a position for that?
Yes.
Okay,
And so the short answer is that even if we do all that we talked about today, we still will be back at this room in 20 years' time looking to make a reform. Because 15%, so if you think about saving for your child's education or saving for retirement, if you didn't start off early enough at the right level, right, then you're going to have a problem later on. So even at 15%, right, it won't be sustainable forever. Even if we make the age 65, it won't be sustainable forever. But the goal now is to start somewhere, right? I'll give you a story. So Guyana, for example, right? Guyana has been in the doldrums for a long time. Their fund is almost as weak as ours, but they found oil, right? So the future looks very bright for Guyana because they're going to have injections of economic activity, lots of money flowing in, new employment, higher wages, able to meet pension costs easily. Our challenge is economic as well as demographic, right? We have a stable population, hasn't grown in probably 15 years, same workforce, but a growing population of pensioners. If we're able to do two things, one is to manage a design of the system to ensure that it's not overly generous. And the second stage is to get the economy growing. And that's beyond my scope and beyond the scope of most of us in the room. But at the end of the day, we're going to be back here in 10 years' time, probably 15 years' time, if the economy remains as is with the population of 4,500 and pensioners keep growing. But everything that we do now to save the future is going to help make whatever we have to do 10 years from now easier to manage. As I mentioned earlier, Barbados is 18.25%. Okay, Guyana is 14. So we're not alone in this regard. But the key thing is to make the promise affordable, and along the way, as experience unfolds, we then make adjustments as necessary.
thank you very much, Mr. Osborne. We now turn internally to a question from a member of the audience. Please proceed.
Good afternoon. Am I loud enough?
Yes.
Yes,
My
I
name is
can
John
hear you.
Allen. Derek, good afternoon. Good
Good
afternoon.
afternoon, how are you doing?
I'm not very bad at all. I'm speaking not for questioning, but to comment, because I look at myself as a pension and insurance student. In fact, I was part of I attended as many of the sessions they had in '86, when they were trying to get everybody involved in the Social Security. One of the things I would like to state here, Social Security is just one of the 3 systems of pension, as we recognize around the world. Social Security is a first-tier poverty prevention. And when we look at providing pensions, we're thinking in terms of your savings, your personal savings, and also private pensions. Okay, we seem to be looking at Social Security as the provider of total pensions. That may not be the best way to approach it. Now, before I move on, I said, Derek, I watched your recommendations, and rather than thinking in terms of one, I look at a combination. First one that grabbed me was the reduction of benefits from maximum from 65 to 55, from 60%, over the 40-year period. The maximum benefits, as you said, could only be achieved in 2026. So at this time, nobody's getting maximum benefits. So if you reduce the benefits to 50, 55, or even 50%, it will not affect many people. Okay. Reduce age from that, suspend pension, eliminate. Increasing the rate of contribution is necessary. And the other one that I would support is injection by government. You're not going to get it right. Our population is small. The economy is not there. But if we look at civil servants, for instance, they get 2 pensions. That's what we should be aiming at, providing the opportunity for residents to contribute to another pension. It's all savings. It's all a compulsory savings. No matter how much money you give people in their pocket, if you don't take some away, the majority of the people will not have much to help them after retirement. So we have to look, as a nation of people, we have to look at compulsory savings as a means of helping people. They're always going to be the indigent or the people that you have to contribute through social welfare. As Mr. Premier said, back in the day it was $60 every 2 weeks. The volcano brought in the social welfare system where people are now getting a fair, maybe $900 a month. But we have to aim by putting as many people on the Social Security and private pensions to wean off people off social welfare. Okay? Back again, like I said, it's going to be a combination of recommendations. No one recommendation will do it for us. It's education, helping people. I know Mr. Quealy back there, and he's going to say, we are taxed too much. But this is our society. We have to pay to live in our society. We have to contribute. And we're getting help, and we will continue to get help. So we have to look at ourselves and decide, you want a pension? Yes, we have to save for ourselves. It's our money. As Derek expressed, what do you call it? Contribution, defined contribution is not the way for Social Security. Defined contribution has become the way for personal pensions, private pensions. But let's get away from private pensions right now, is that the Social Security system is not a cure-all, it's a first-year poverty prevention, okay? And to save it, we have to adopt a number of recommendations. Not anyone will do it. And it still would not suffice because of our population, the level of contributions going in. I thank you.
Thank you as well for your presentation. Are we going to get something?
Can I just jump in here 1 second, Mr. White?
From any of the panel? Mr. Osborne?
Mr. White, can I jump in?
Yes, yes.
So thank you very much, Mr. Allen. Very well said. I'll agree with you totally. I think we have to talk about the gratuity, the 10-year gratuity that we have in the labor law. So essentially, that could be looked at as a form of pension. It's a requirement that employers have to pay. But a 45-year-old, after 20 years service, gets a good chunk of money and blows it. And at 65, there's nothing left, right? So I think this is a perfect opportunity to revise that gratuity, right? Make it something different. And it's only payable at a certain age. I mean, the total value could remain as is. Essentially, it's about a 4.5% contribution every year by the employer. That's what it works out to be by the employer, but 5% contributed by the employer. So if we can change the way we pay that lump sum gratuity, so it's not available at 25 or 45 or 55, but it's only available to top up Social Security when you get to a certain age. That will help a long way to ensure that older people can live comfortably on Social Security, their private pension, whatever source it comes from, and then whatever savings they're able to accumulate over time.
The speaker in the corner wanted to say something? Yeah. Good evening, sir. Yeah.
Good evening. I think that contributions to the Social Security scheme has come from workers, right? And I think that if you have a government in power, the government's supposed to put things in place so that we have jobs, we have opportunities, so people can work and make money. Bring people off the pension scheme, bring people off the welfare system. The government, the premier, and the team has to put things in place to put people to work so that the contributions can be paid, and then people who going on welfare can go to work and make things happen. That's the only way you get this thing. Because you talk about cutting. If you cut, you put more people in poverty, and then more people go in the system. You can't, because you have to think of ways to make things happen. You have to build new things. You have to create things. No matter how much education you have to have vision. And if you have no vision to develop and make things better, nothing is going to happen. So you are going to talk about all these schemes. If you have no plans to do nothing, you have to have plans. You have to have plans to build. You have to plans to invest. You have plans to do everything. So you build one country. Not telling about you're cutting down and cutting here, cutting back to make Social Security work. It's not going to work. If you get 100 million, 50 million a year, you have to channel the money into avenues to make the country better. It's as simple as that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Speaker, anybody wish to comment on that? All right, so we take the other question from the floor.
I join the conversation again because Derek introduced the gratuity or the severance benefit. When we introduced the severance benefit somewhere around 91, 92, we the insurance people, I'm referring to Derek's father and I because we're insurance people, we looked at Senkits and recognized that Senkits had a legal severance law which allowed employees and employers to contribute. So at the end, you can walk with that contribution. In other words, 20 years after you leave the job, you don't have to go back to your employer to collect that money. The money would have already been in the system. Barbados also have come up with a severance law, which is saying the same thing. It's taking the burden off the employer, which means he's contributing with every paycheck into that severance system. It's like, as you say, it's a gratuity, it's a lump sum you're going to get. But the law allows it to be managed and ruled by an organized law, a law that is in place around the world. I've only seen severance. Derek, you can help me. Is there severance benefit outside the Caribbean?
So you mentioned Senkits.
Senkits and Barbados.
Dominique also has a redundancy fund.
Okay, it's the same.
Senkits is in trouble. After doing some work with them, I'm trying to revise that. Barbados has worked very, very well. It's a huge fund.
Yes. And, you know, you're not allowed. You leave this employer. It's there. It's managed by probably the Social Security system, but separately. But we have to have these systems of compulsory savings that you contribute. As Derek said, you pool it. That's what insurance is. You don't wait for 20 years for the employer to say, I don't have the money. It is there. I thank you again.
Thank you. From the floor as well. So there was two comments from the floor. Just asking if any panel member have anything they would like to say based on those two contributions. They were not really questions, but they were very useful contributions. Any points?
I like the contribution about increasing employment and so forth. Because if you really delve down into the problem of Social Security, you would realize that, as Derek alluded to in one of his graphs, 91% of all benefits.
Well, you can actually
in progress.
Only in the tourism sector, right? And people actually leave for 1 week and go back the next week just to get a 10-year gratuity, right? It's really bad. And so we have to learn from other experiences, but also find a way to decide what's best for us in terms of no gaps, but no over generosity for any groups of people.
Agreed. Yeah, but what I was saying is actually that.
And I will say too, and along the way, and you know, I've mentioned this to some of the PSs and certain companies in Montserrat who I do some work with. there certainly is room, I believe, for, as Mr. Allen said, a national, probably defined contribution plan that is, it could be voluntary for employers to help meet the gratuity obligation, but it's a way of people saving money with expert investment advice, so they can put their money as opposed to 0.5% in the bank or 0 in the bank, they can get 4 or 5% through an efficient way where the cost of administration are low, and we can do that for the whole country, right? It could be voluntary at first, but gradually move towards mandatory. And again, you know, Turks and Caicos is thinking of something very similar. I'm doing some work with them on that through the government first, but the goal is to encourage private employers to find a way to save money, and employees who are especially self-employed to save on their own.
Thank you very much, Mr. Osborne. Let's go back now to the managing director to make his point. Yeah.
Yeah. The point is, if you have 91% of your benefit, total benefits being one, in actual fact, age benefit, you would realize that to really fix this problem, you have a look at the things that make up the age benefits. Now, when you have, I think you alluded to it earlier, Peter, you have person paying the maximum, and their contribution is only $360 per month.
I'm not hearing.
You hearing now? Anyhow, Derek, what I'm saying is what we talk about all the time. You have a person paying at the maximum. That means, like someone like me, I will pay $360 per month. But that $360, if you were to bring the minimum pension to a monthly figure, you'll find that the monthly figure will be $333. So in actual fact, somebody paying at the maximum is just barely paying for one pensioner and a little bit at the minimum pension level. When you have pension it was before 3.5 contributed to every pensioner, now it's down to 2.2. It simply means that there is not enough contribution by persons out there to make up for all these pension payments. So you will always have this problem unless you increase your numbers. Now, we're not going to go out and make babies tomorrow because that's not used to us right away. But in essence, we have to seek ways, creative ways of increasing employment, thereby increasing contribution rate. Because at the end of the day, even when you go 15%, as Derek said, we were back in this room again 15 years, well not me, but somebody else in this room, 15 or less than 15 years, because we're in an aging population. So everybody is turning 60, well not everybody, people are turning 60 almost on a daily basis. We know because they're coming to us. And even those people who are not yet 60, they're coming to us still. Because one guy is a Montserrat, but he lived in the UK. His 60th birthday is April next year. But he have already come and inquired as to how much pension and whatever, you see? So unless we address that problem, numbers is one of the biggest problems we have, we're just not producing enough contributors per pensioner. The alternative that somewhere along the line, government, sad to say, but government might have to interject funds to compensate for those lack of contributors.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scotland, for your intervention there. Again, just for those who are joining us via radio and via social media, we're having here at the Cultural Center a town hall meeting which is geared towards informing and engaging the public on the state of the Montserrat Social Security Fund and looking at the different options that are currently before the government as to how to address the challenges that the fund is facing. I'll now go to Fiona to ask if you have any questions for us coming through online.
Yes.
Then we'll take another one from inside.
Okay, so just following up on what Mr. Scotland just ended by saying, someone online is asking, how much is the government willing to inject to the Social Security Fund? Are they willing to match the increase per person per year by percentage overall?
Thank you very much for that question. The recommendations that we have from the last report is asking government to invest over 4 years as we seek to increase the contribution rate from 9% to 15%. And that for every year that the fund is increased, that government through its whatever agencies would contribute monies to the fund. So let's get to it. At 11, if we increase the fund to 11% if we increase the contribution to 11%, then government would have to put in that 4% between 11 and 15, which equates to $2.52 million in the first year. You now add another percentage point or 2 percentage points, so you're now up to 12. You're now up to 12%, and the government injection would reduce as you increase your contribution rates. So by year 2, government contribution will be 3%, which is 1.89 million. Year 3, when the contribution rate goes up to 13%, government contribution will be 2%, with a 1.26 million. By year 4, the contribution rate will be at 14%, and government contribution will be 1%, which is 0.63 million. So you notice that once the contribution rate increases, there's a relationship between the increase in the contribution rate and the level of injections that government make. As the contribution goes up, government contribution comes down. So by year 5, when we are at 15% contribution, then government will pay no more money into the fund for that period of time.
Thank you very much for that explanation, Honorable Premier. We now take the question from the floor.
Come to the mic.
I have to be careful. I have to be very careful coming up here because they put it on social media that I come every time and do all the talking. And then the smart ones not saying nothing and they still giving me word because I come and talk. But anyway, Mr. Scotland, this question is for you. It's a yes or no answer. You just listen carefully. We know the situation and we realize that funds are going down, and I know you have your board and things, but I'm asking, are you thinking about putting a team in place or a board in place for investment? Because if contributions are not making it, it simply means that you have to look towards investment. And whatever little funds you have to start thinking about investment in something. So I'm asking if you have an investment team or you're thinking about having an investment team to help you, get some funds.
We do have an investment team which is enshrined in the regulation, in the Act. So there is an investment committee. But you would realize that with little bit of money, you're not going to get that much of an investment. Hence, we took the decision a couple of years ago to invest on the international market, which now is yielding a fair amount to what, in comparison to the others. Because when you have only $15 million in cash now, you still got these obligations of pensioners. You can't afford to take the unnecessary risk of seeking a higher return. So you got to balance the risk with the return at the same time. So the board, the investment committee have made a decision to accept no less than 2.5% on the investment. So if you come in 1.5, it's a no, we don't bother going to invest with you, we go elsewhere. And don't think about banks, because banks is 0 or 0.5, Mr. Greeley? Only 0.5, 0.5 you get at banks. So the investments that will give you highest return is on the international market, but then you need to put it there for a while. So we have an external investment manager and an internal investment manager. And one of the duties of the external manager is to look at these investments in a real-time situation and make this shift of, if the stock is going up, you reach a point where you cut off and you cut out the stock and reinvest in some other thing.
Okay. So you want a suggestion here? I think, how much people you paying every month?
The
That's on
pensioners?
average.
Pensioners?
Yes.
The 1,131.
So why you not lend any money and take the money to their money? Okay, let's say for instance, I'm a pensioner.
Uh-huh.
You're paying me whatever you pay me.
Yes.
I'm saying to you, so why you don't lend me $20,000 at 7%? Oh, not 7, that's high. That's why you don't lend me $20,000 at 5%. Because you're getting 2.5% where you have your money. So this way, you're sure you're getting your payback because you're taking out of my pension every month. That's the easiest way out. You have 1,000 thing.
Yeah, but
So
the problem you're faced with, Joel, I see what you're saying. The problem we are faced with.
There's no problem with that. You never tried it. How you got a problem? You never tried it, Mr. Scotland. How you see a problem already?
I'm not saying that.
But you said there's a problem. There can't be a problem if nothing. Have you tried it?
I'm not saying that. Well, we have tried investment and local market.
No, I'm saying to you,
right?
you have 1,000 people you're paying every month.
And what
You lend them the money.
What if they die?
If they're dead, you insure them. You have to insure them, Mr. Scotland.
Okay.
They have to insure. They say they do the same thing like the bank, but you lend them at a better rate than what you get if you have your money overseas. You lend me, you're paying me 1,000 something a month. So you give me a loan to cover most of that, and then you take it back every month. You don't have to look for me. Just pay me the dead. Don't let anybody kill me.
No, we're not paying you dead.
Okay. All right. So that's a thought for your investment committee and so on. All right. So okay, we have another one from the floor.
Yes.
Let's take the floor. Yes.
Good afternoon. My question would come after, but I would have heard the Honorable Premier talk about an injection into the Social Security Fund. I would have heard Mr. Osborne, Derek Osborne, speak about the recommendations, and I wanted to ask if they have thought about the implications of those recommendations, because I think that they would affect people, especially with the cost of living constantly increasing and the economic issues that we are facing now or likely in the future. What are the implications of some of those recommendations that Mr. Osborne presented in his presentation earlier?
Thank you. Mr. Osborne, are you with us?
Sure, I'm still here.
Okay, you wish to offer a comment on that point?
Sure, I'll go first. So, if you ever heard about a rock and a hard place, that's probably where we are today. So, if you think about, and the young lady who spoke a while ago might be, I don't know how old she is, but she isn't pensionable yet, for sure. So the dilemma is, do I concern about my living, able to consume and enjoy life today as an employed person versus getting no pension when it's my turn to get and not allowing the people who we promised a pension to get it 6-7 years from now, right? So I understand the dilemma. I understand that the cost and the choices you make. So less disposable income means I can't spend like I used to, okay? But on the flip side, it allows our parents or grandparents to get a pension and allows me or us who are not contributing to get a pension it's our turn to get. So while we have to consider, life today, we also have to expect that we're going to live another 40, 50 years. And how are we going to survive comfortably in the old age? And it's about choices, right? So at the end of the day, the longer we take to make these reforms, is the worse it's going to get. And I'll come back to the question that the Premier answered about taxes, about government contributions a while ago. We have to remember that whenever government puts money into anything, whether it be a subsidy for the airline, Social Security, it comes from taxpayers. Fortunately, right now, those taxpayers, many of them live in England, right? Or they work and live in England. We hope for the day when we no longer have to depend on England to meet part of our budget. And so if that day ever comes and government is giving subsidies to entities like Social Security or airlines, that money comes from the pockets of workers in Montserrat and employees in Montserrat. So at the end of the day, government giving money is our money. Social Security getting contributions is our money. And so what we have to do is to find a balance between a pension system that is adequate, as affordable and sustainable. Those three things, they need to go together, but they come with opposite forces, right? Of course, we want more, but wanting more means the cost is going to be higher. So we have to balance the reasonableness or the adequacy of a pension with the cost of the pension and finding a way that the economy generates enough activity to produce those contributions to meet the promises that we've made along the way.
Thank you very much, Mr. Osborne. We now ask Fiona to tell us, or Premier, yes.
Just to follow up, just to follow up on Mr. Osborne's contribution, we understand that an increase in contribution is going to affect people. It's a foregone conclusion. The question is, do we want to make the sacrifice now to save the fund, or do we not make the sacrifice now and allow the fund to go under? And that is why I started off by saying that we need not consider the contribution as a payment, but rather a savings or an investment. If we look at it in that light, then clearly we understand that we're protecting our own future down the road. If we see it as a cost, a payment, direct payment, then we're going to be bothered about is reducing my disposable income, and so I don't want to do it. And the question is whether those of us who are working and paying to, whether we want to continue so that we can have something at the end. It might be okay for some people who are in a position now, and as Mr. Allen quite rightly pointed out, the theory is that if you are working and you want to, if you want to retain the same lifestyle when you retire, then you have to have not only Social Security, you have to have savings and additional insurance. That's what they tell us. And so, assuming that there are persons who neither have savings nor additional insurance when they retire, clearly, the only source of income that they will have, and maybe your children and grandchildren, for all you know, and the only source of revenue income that they will have, it is Social Security. And so, we have to make a sacrifice. And I'm appealing to us as a people and members of the fund, we have to make that sacrifice. Yes, it's going to create hardship. But somehow or the other, some people is thrust into the decision-making process to take those hard decisions. And unfortunately, it falls on us. But we'll talk to you and do what you have to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. Let's hear from...
Is there need to restructure the operations of the fund in an effort to reduce overhead costs?
We hear talk all the time about administrative costs, right? Being high. Administrative cost is a relation to your contribution income. So in other words, if I collect $5 million in contribution and my administration cost is $1 million, roughly you say that almost 20% that you collect, you're paying out in administration costs. However, if you were to somehow raise your contribution income to say $10 million, your administration costs basically go remain constant. So you move from 20% to over 10%. So because it's a ratio, if you look at it at dollar value over the years, other than when we were building, you'll find that the costs are relatively constant because we do the actual report every 3 years. So we only budget that once every 3 years. Our auditor, we got a budget every year, right? Salaries have not got to raise the salary for a long time. So we do realize that there's a need for curtail operation costs, but it is high when you report it because of the way you report it, but not necessarily from a dollar value that if it was $1 million last year, it's going to be $1.5 million this year, and then next year going to $2 million, like that. But it's reflective of how much contribution you get. So if your contribution remain constant, your operation costs will remain constant. If it goes up, you come down, and if you go down, operation costs stay steady, you go reflect even higher.
Thank you very much. And I think the chairman of the board also alluded to...
I'll jump in here, Mr. White.
Yeah, yes, go ahead, Mr.
So it won't be pleasant, but I'm going to say it anyway. What we have right now is a situation where 25% of every dollar saved is going towards operating the system. Any of us given a choice to save money for our pension or education for a child or whatever would not put our money there, right? And so we have a problem. But when you have a small island with very few people and you have an important institution to run, you have to separate certain duties, you have to have certain positions that have to be filled with people who are skilled, and you have to have technology and so on, right? So I understand the challenge that we have with trying to keep our costs down. And so what we've always recommended, right, is that the government, and I guess even Social Security, can do more with what they have. So for example, a few years ago, they started paying the welfare pensioners at a small cost to government, right? We have in Montserrat a PAYE system where the employer sends one check to Inland Revenue, one check to Social Security. Maybe we could have one entity do that business. It will reduce employment a little bit, but hopefully the extra funds we generate can create more activity island-wide, right? And so I'll tell you, in Canada and the US, their costs are probably 0.2% because the Inland Revenue, IRS in the US, they collect every single deduction from salary. And then behind the scenes, they send checks, federal, local, state, and so on, right? So we have to find a way in Montserrat to look at all of our agencies and try and make each of them more efficient, right? Instead of having 5 boards and 5 CEOs and 5 directors, we could probably have 2, right? Yes, we're going to lose a few jobs, but hopefully we'll become more attractive to international people looking to invest in Montserrat. They're efficient, they're quick, they get things done, ease of doing business is enhanced, and we can have a better, a more attractive country to get investments.
Thank you. So over to Fiona.
Okay. If government is moving the contribution to 15%, are they going to reduce the tax deduction? 30% tax and 15% social security could put serious hardship on persons. For those countries with a higher rate in social security, their income tax is either non-existent or very low. Any takers?
Even though we're moving the contribution rate to 15%, the individual does not pay 15%. So the individual will only pay a maximum of 7% when you go to 15. So it's split between the individual and the employer, right?
And again, what I'll say is that if you do it slowly, right? So for example, Dominica, a poorer country than us, right? They have raised their rate. It's going from 10, it was probably 5-6 years ago, to 15. I think it's 0.5% every year, right? So they started early, and you don't miss that $10 every month if it goes by a small amount every year, right? You adjust in January and you adjust in February, and then by March you forget it. You don't miss it anymore, right? Unfortunately, we've taken long to adjust. The rate was low, is low still, but I think after the first one, thereafter it will be an easier pill to swallow.
Thank you very much, Mr. Osborne. And if you're joining us again, just remember that you're hearing from us at the Cultural Center, where we are discussing or having a town hall meeting which is geared towards informing and engaging the public on the state of the Montserrat Social Security Fund and the different options that are currently before the government of Montserrat for consideration. Based on the timings and booking of the room, told we have just about 10 more minutes, so we will try to the best of our ability to address some more questions that we have coming in online.
Right, we do have quite a bit online, so to the online listeners, we're going to try and get through them as quickly as possible. We have about 20 questions here. What are the objectives to be achieved in the short, medium, or long term by the solutions proposed? I'm not sure. Some of these might have been answered already, and if they have been, just indicate so, and I could proceed to the next question. And I think that one is one. I think that one is one that would have been answered. As a founding member and a former director of the Social Security Board, this is more of a contribution. I am pleased that something will happen to maintain the sustainability of the Social Security. There must be some form of increase, even though it might be rough at this time, because if nothing is done to get an increase in the founding of the security, many persons in a few years will have nothing, so something must be done. Will the ceiling of 4,000 be increased, or is it just the contribution percentage?
That was one recommendation made by Derek. But we, the board members, as well as management, felt that at this point in time, is not worth the while. The reason being, with an increase in ceiling would mean an increase in your payout as well. And if you're trying to curtail payout, especially long-term payout, you don't want to increase the rate and the ceiling and hit the people because they're crying already. Hit them one time. So we decided to take it a stage by stage basis. We go to do the increase in the contribution, and then sometime in the future we do the increase in ceiling. But even yeah, go ahead, Derek.
No, I'll just jump in and say that there is a possibility of asking higher paid people to pay more, but getting less benefit on that portion of the benefit, right? So for example, there are systems in the world where the benefit is progressive, and so higher income people actually end up getting less per dollar put in than lower income people. So we can think about it as well as an option going forward.
How does the government's agenda of healthcare finance reforms and moving to universal healthcare, which will include care provisions for retired persons, play into these plans or considerations for the Social Security Fund? Increases in contributions from the public and government will also be required for a national health insurance mechanism. Will there be a united approach between a national health insurance fund and the Social Security Fund? And what are the potential consequences and challenges for us with that, given the sustainability challenges with the current Social Security Fund? A very long one.
Thank you very much. What I can say is that the whole concept of universal health insurance has been on the making for quite a while. And we have not been able to come to a consensus. What I do know is that health financing is going to become an issue shortly. And if I'm not mistaken, the Ministry of Health might very well be undertaking some consultation, some work in terms of health financing. I think what we will have to do is to wait until when that work is done and see exactly what they recommended, whether we can combine the health insurance element to Social Security, because clearly health insurance is going to be a cost. And I see where the person is getting that if you have to pay Social Security, pay a cost for your health insurance and pay the cost, it's going to be a burden. But again, while we are heavily taxed, and somebody raised a question about our tax structure, while we are heavily taxed, there are countries in the world that have far more in these kind of contributions than we pay. But this is no consolation. We will be working with the teams to see exactly how we can combine. But I know that definitely that health insurance is going to be high on the agenda, especially when we have a new hospital.
Okay, one moment. Okay, there must be some sort of increase. People must learn to cut their lifestyle when things are tough and to help themselves and their country. That's just a suggestion here or comment. I'm going to move to where I see a question. Some persons. Kindly explain the rate of accrual of benefits. Example, roughly 50% maximum pension benefit seems low for someone who was contributing since inception in 1986. For example, NIS in Barbados accrues at 2% per year for the first 20 years and 1.25% per year thereafter, yielding a pension benefit up to a maximum of 60% of average insurable earnings for the best 5 years. So an explanation of the rate of the accrual of benefits. Mr. Osborne, would you take that one? Okay, we're not hearing you. He might be muted. He's
Sorry.
muted. Okay, go ahead.
Right. I should be on now.
Yes.
Right. So in Montserrat, we revised the accrual rate schedule several years ago to, again, as a first step in reducing long-term costs. Barbados did the same thing 15 years ago. So it's no longer 20% for the first, 2% for the first 20 years. It's 2 for the first, it's 3 for the first 10 years. But at the end of the day, so they reached, after 40 years, 60%. Montserrat was the same thing too. The recommendation now is that we go to 55 because no one else has reached 55 yet. But at the end of the day, Barbados pays, as we see on the chart earlier, 18.25% contribution, right? And on top of that, they pay 1.5% for unemployment and they pay half for severance, right? So a total Barbados contribution is 20.25% total contribution for a private sector worker in Barbados, right? So at the end of the day, a generous benefit means more contributions required.
Thank you.
very much, Mr. Osborne. Just inquiring, do we have any questions from the hall, on the floor? Make your way to the mic while we take something from online.
Okay, there has been a suggestion to lessen pension. Would this include current pensioners? What will be the impact on those who depend monthly on it?
No one, to my knowledge, has talked about reducing actual pensions or cutting pension payment. I haven't heard that one yet.
Okay.
Okay, we take one from the floor, Mr.
It's generally comments I make.
Yes, general comment, yes.
I find I have an obligation to speak on matters of insurance and pensions because on Montserrat, I'm a chartered insurance practitioner. I have been that way for almost 30 years. Derek, I'm quite comfortable and pleased that you still refer to as us and we. You're speaking from over there, but you sound like a Montserratian.
Never change, never
And
change.
You have gone into messing around with our tax. You're telling us about our tax and so on. Anyway, Mr. Premier, I applaud you who came up with that recommendation for the contribution, that reducing contribution from government is an excellent method. Also, Joel, in his first comment, spoke about economic activity. Maybe he didn't say it like that, but that's what's going to contribute to contributions. Okay? I would like to throw out to you, Mr. Premier, I am a student of health insurance, healthcare insurance financing, pensions, social security. I don't think I've taken the opportunity to contribute as much as I could. But please be aware, as I'm here, I'm supporting Derek. Not so much in support, but I'm on the same plane as him. It's Montserrat. If we want to have something good for us, we have to make a contribution. It's all about personal savings. And the Premier, you're speaking about pension reforms. Way back when you reformed the pensions, I heard Victor James says, look, I thought it was pensions for everybody, and it's just civil servants. Sort of bring your pension reform into an embracing for the whole community, private sector, as well as civil servants. There are model legislations out there. You don't have to bother. It's Montserrat. Yes, we're going to say being taxed a lot, but if you want to live here, the cost for living in Montserrat is going to be high. And we have to make a contribution on our behalf. I thank you.
Thank you. We take 2 more questions from online.
2 more.
Okay, let's see what you could come up with.
Yes, let's because it's such a important issue. A lot
Yes,
of comments
yes,
are coming in and questions. What is being done to ensure that employers pay in the contributions that have been deducted from employees' wages and salaries?
Yes, I think Mr. Scotland will take that one.
We have stepped up on our compliance, especially after the COVID, where a lot of people weren't paying, especially the private sector, more so to do with the self-employed persons. We have done so by engaging our lawyer more with the collections. So no longer we're chasing around people, we get loyally chase around them. So in essence, the delinquency is more so due from the private sector self-employed persons. You have very few. We used to have that in the past where, especially construction sector, where they would deduct and don't pay. And now, where we find a difficult employer, we do collection every week. So the inspector will go every week and do the collection as opposed to wait until the month end. Because it's easier to find $40 or $60 than to find $200 or $300 a month.
Thank you.
Sorry,
Yeah, let's take some more. Yeah.
I just want to make one comment on the compliance issue, separate from the hard work that the compliance department of the Social Security Fund has done. They've been excellent in trying to get persons to pay up. Separate from that, we've learned from COVID. During the last COVID relief program, working, and I'm speaking now as Ministry of Finance, we would have used the Social Security as a benchmark for getting assistance. And the government and the Minister of Finance has instructed that any program that the Ministry of Finance or any government department is offering going forward in terms of relief, grants, anything, Social Security payments, being up to date with your payments will be a cornerstone of that. No one will access, it's already done with procurement in terms of tax compliance. But in terms of getting any form of government relief or grants or aid, you would have to be Social Security compliant.
Just
If I can jump in here, Mr. Chairman, quickly. Anybody who wants to do business in Montserrat, whether it be a taxi driver, a fisherman, or whatever license he or she requires, should be Social Security compliant.
Yeah, I was going to make that point, that we need to step up on our individual self-employed persons who are registered. I know it's difficult for some of them because they don't have a regular job, but I think there's a formula in place where when they get a good job, they can pay a lump sum. But I think the people of Montserrat really know my position in terms of when deductions are, when monies are deducted from persons' wages and they're not paying in. I have a very strong feeling that, and I make no bones about it, that if deductions are made from somebody's salary or wages, they must be paid in. If not, it is a crime, and we think I will strongly support making the legislation to make it a criminal offense for not paying in people's contribution. I make no ifs and buts about that. It is people's money, and they should be paid in on time.
Thank you very much. Let's take a question from the floor. Yes.
Good evening. Mr. Derek, I would like you to give me a feedback on what you think of the current investment portfolio, and is it maximizing its return? I heard the managing director said, that's the minimum, 2.5%. Seems as if they're playing it safe. I want you to give me some feedback as to what you think the portfolio have done over the years, the investment portfolio.
Right. I'm not quite sure if you can share my screen right now with the investment portfolio mix. The number one challenge now is that given the looming crisis of having to have cash to pay benefits in the short term, you really can't invest in a lot of things now because you need to have, unless we raise the rate soon, we must have that cash ability in the next few years, right? So right now, a third of the money is in cash and a half is in equities. Having a half of the portfolio overseas with a professional money manager is excellent. I don't think anybody else in the whole, other than BVI, probably are Turks and Caicos. Only two of them can probably claim having that much of their portfolio invested overseas in equities. The challenge we have now, so the government bonds of St. Kitts and Dominica, they're small. Hopefully we get that money eventually. But the mix is good. You have some local, a little bit OEC regional supported region, and overseas. The challenge is we have too much in cash on a normal basis, earning 1.5% or 2%, but only because we have that looming crisis where, every year we have to find $3 million above what comes in contributions. to meet expenses. If that were not the case, and you knew you had enough cash flow every year, you could invest that extra $6 million more aggressively overseas. We have no foreign exchange concerns overseas, and hopefully, you get higher returns on the international market. So given where we are, it's probably as best as you can do right now, given the $3 million shortfall we have every year.
And what's the average return we've been getting over the years? Because that wasn't coming across.
I can tell you it's probably been 3% for the last few years. Probably between 3 and 4% for the last few years, which is low. And so again, right, the whole region, the whole world has gone through a low interest rate environment. Equities are doing extremely well, but bonds and other fixed income securities are not doing well. We've been conservative for the most part with the cash, but hopefully, if we are sure that the 15% is going to be received in total from multiple sources, then there's no longer need to be conservative and hold cash, and can invest more overseas and in different investment opportunities that could yield higher returns.
Thank you very much, Mr. Osborne. And with the consent of the panel, we're taking a few more minutes, getting closer to 7 instead. So let's go back to Ms. Alexander. Mrs. Alexander?
Yes, question to the Premier. What is being done to address the demographic issue? Clearly, Montserrat needs more people, 2,000 to 3,000 more, to save the fund in the next 10 years. Where are the policies, incentives to attract?
Thanks very much. Very, very interesting question. We have been offering jobs out there, and I have a position that we offer a lot of TC positions, and I don't know if Montserratians really apply for those positions, and that is one avenue for Montserratians to return. We're also offering incentives for construction of homes and other things so they can come home. Yes, jobs are going to be critical. The point is, right now, as a matter of fact, when I got into office, the first thing I did was to ask my regional affairs officer and her team to come together with a population strategy. I've had a draft paper a few days ago, because it is important that we build the population. It's not to come, because Montserrat is not the easiest place to live and work, but we want to encourage people to come home. So we're working on that strategy. What I want from my team is a mix. What exactly do we want a population to look like? What percentage of the population should be indigenous Montserratian? What percentage should be CARICOM colleagues? What percentage should be from other countries? And if we get that mix, then we have to do a strategy to target these people to come. That is exactly what we're working on right now, and I know there's a team. I'm also looking at our immigration strategy, and I don't want to call anybody's name, because our immigration and our population go hand in hand. They work together. And what you really want is a population that can contribute to the workforce and to the economy. Some years ago, we had an open invitation to our detriment. What we want now is a population that can contribute significantly to the development of Montserrat, and that is our aim.
Thank you very much.
If I can jump in here quickly, I don't want to object to the Premier, but at the end of the day, people don't migrate to do nothing, right? Countries have tried across the world to attract people to come to the country. Moving to Montserrat, if you're married, you want a spouse to come with you, children to come with you, school's got to be there, is a big decision, right? So it's more about creating an environment that attracts business, that attracts investment, that's going to create jobs, that are going to be sustainable jobs for people to live in Montserrat and enjoy living there. Not just a policy to attract them, there has to be something to attract investment that's going to create opportunities for employment.
Thank you. Discontinue, this is a suggestion, discontinue the maximum payments. Let higher paid workers' contributions continue to increase. Can the director indicate how the payment of the early reduced pension has affected the fund? Won't it make sense to keep the government's contribution at a steady 4% for the period of time and use the extras to invest in order to keep generating monies for a longer period of time, since we know that in 15 years we'll be back here again? Just a thought. Do you want to address any of those? The first one.
Reduced pension have adversely affected the fund. The whole purpose of pension reform by moving the pension age from 60 to 65 was to eliminate the reduced pension. Now, what is happening in Montserrat, unlike several of the other countries that I'm aware of, Montserrat got a higher take-up than those countries for early pensions. So a lot more people are claiming early pension from Montserrat. And you got to realize that whilst there might be some living on Montserrat, most so persons living off Montserrat are the ones who have not contributed for the past 10 or 12 years, but by virtue of the fact they have contributed 10 years prior to them migrating, they're now becoming eligible for a pension. So one of the recommendations was to increase the penalty. That hopefully might make some people stop and think, do I really want to take my pension now, especially if I'm in Montserrat, or do I wait a bit further and less penalty? Right now, the penalty in place is not a deterrent at all.
In terms of a continuous government contribution, I can't make that promise. The fund has to become sustainable. And so the measures that we're taking now is to ensure that government phases its way out of that kind of contribution and that the fund becomes sustainable. So we are talking and we are hoping, I believe we can, within the next 4 or 5 years, be able to contribute to get the fund to that level. After that, until then, they'll have to do their best. But what happened is that, and I just take back to history a little bit, if you don't mind. When the fund started, government workers were not paying contributions, which is against the law. They weren't paying it. And it was not until 2004, 5, thereabout, that, and I was in a union, and they wanted to do some things, and we pushed the government to then put over government workers to Social Security. What happened is that for those years, persons who were not paying Social Security, they are some of the highest paid pensioners. So they came over, not paying. Then government injected some funds, I think in 2004, 2005, 20 million. That was paid out as pension. And that's where a lot of the trouble started. We cannot make that mistake again. And we have to get everybody to pay their contribution. Self-employed, I urge the fund to go out there and tap on all these people's door and get them to come in. But we will do what we have to do to save the fund.
Thank you very much, Honorable Premier, for those words. If you have just joined us, just to remind you that you were listening or watching the town hall meeting here at the Cultural Center, which is geared to informing and engaging the public on the state of the Montserrat Social Security Fund and the different options that are currently before the government of Montserrat for consideration. And those options, as we would have heard tonight from the presenters, include increasing the contribution rates and to adopt a schedule of additional increase over a number of years. The other one is to gradually increase the age at which reduced pensions are payable, while at the same time increase the reduction factors. The other one is to reduce the maximum age for invalidity pension, yes, percentage rate. And the last one, for government of Montserrat to interject funds into the Social Security Fund in the short term to offset the deficits. I will now go around to the panel members to ask them for their closing remarks. And now call on Mr. Osborne for your remarks.
Thank you, Mr. White, and thank you to your audience, both at home and abroad, for the comments and the suggestions. I really believe we're at a critical point for the fund. Tough decisions have to be made, and I trust that the population will make the decisions easier for the government. Key stakeholders like the Chamber of Commerce, like the unions, they have to come on board and appreciate that by saving the fund today, we're ensuring that our children and grandchildren can have that source of income to look forward to when it's their turn to get. And so I'll encourage Government at the same time, to look broadly, I've heard health insurance mentioned, the gratuity fund. We have to look at all government programs. At the end of the day, some of them are now disjointed. If we can look holistically at all government programs and ensure that they all fit together nicely and they operate together and in the best interest of both the current and in terms of costs as well as benefits. And I would hope that the board, will be able to spread the word through whatever means there are to ensure that the population is well informed, share the financial statements every year with the population, share the actuarial report in a nice simple form for everyone to understand, so that whenever these decisions have to be made, there's general support across the age groups, across labor, across employers, for the best interest of Montserrat and the people of Montserrat wherever they live.
Thank you very much, Mr. Osborne. Now closing remarks from the Honorable Premier.
Thank you. Let me thank Mr. Osborne for volunteering his time. I know he's busy, family time with us this afternoon. Thank you very much. Thank you for those of you who have come out, those of you who are listening and have been contributing online. We want to thank you very much. My administration is serious. We must save Social Security Fund. We will do whatever we have to do. And that is why we have begun this series of consultation. I met with the opposition first, didn't get a lot. I'm now having this one, and there's going to be some more, a few more consultation, either on radio or wherever, so that we can get your feedback, and that we can, during the process, we can then formulate the policy and the legislation going forward, because it's going to require some legislative amendments. But I'm committed, and we are committed to do that. And I want us to, all of us, to work together. I plead with you to come along with us, support us. This is not us. This is not my administration. This is the people of Montserrat. It's in all our interest. We have to safeguard the funds for future generation, and so that persons who are now paying can live a decent life when they retire. So we will come back to you again, maybe not in this setting, but another setting, where we can talk some more and get some more feedback. Thank you all very much. Thank the board, the chairman of the board, and for coordinating this meeting. And Mr. White, thank you very much for. I have my work to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Premier. As we know, the Social Security Fund is overseen by a board of directors. Current chairman of the board is Mr. Kenya Lee, and he's supported by other members like Mrs. Lauren Lewis, the deputy chair, Mr. Joseph Irish, Ms. Michelle Castle, Mr. Peter Creeley, and Ms. Lovetta Silcott. The chairman himself is here as part of the panel this evening, and now call on him for his closing remarks.
Yes, good evening again, everyone. I would like to also thank everyone for participating. I would like to pay special thanks to Ms. Brenda Lindsay, who was the driving force behind the coordination of this event. I would also like to thank my fellow board members who have advocated along with the managing director and the staff of the Social Security to the government for the necessary amendments and recommendations that have been considered. I would also like to stress, as a member of the public, and Derek would have highlighted, that even if we instituted all of the recommendations, that will only make the fund sustainable for a certain period of time. It is the hope that the situation on Montserrat changes so that we can have even more sustainability, but we must see this as the first step, as it is not going to make the fund sustainable indefinitely, and I think that needs to be highlighted. I also would like to thank Derek Osborne, Mr. Derek Osborne, not only as the actuary, but as a member of the diaspora who, on a personal level and as a member of the Ministry of Finance, that I'm able to reach out and get assistance and advice from on a regular basis without name or favor. So I'd like to thank him also on a personal and professional level. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Managing Director of the Social Security, your final word?
A whole lot of thank you. Okay, so I won't go over that. I want to thank in particular the government of Montserrat for taking initiative to try to help in resolving the problems with Social Security Fund. While I said that I would urge them to make the necessary non-monetary recommendation, like for instance, the accrued rate from 60 to 65, it's best to do it now. No one will be affected because no one is at 55 right now, but people are getting there. So if you do it now, it could happen. If you don't do it now, people would already reach that stage. The other one, which is the biggest problem we're faced with, is a non-monetary thing, is to increase the rate or abolish the early pension. Those two could go immediately. I could wait and see what's going to happen with the government interjection and the raising of the ceiling and so forth. But let us do something now. As the Premier said earlier, a choice, we don't have the choice of do nothing because that's not a choice. So let us get on with something that could be done, at least that will help us in the short term.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scotland. And it is only left to me now to say a special thanks to the GIU, Government Information Unit, that is, to DITES, to ZJB Radio, to DCCL for supporting and ensuring that this town hall meeting is available to as much persons as possible, locally and abroad. I am Peter W.A. White, and on behalf of the Ministry of Finance, I wish to thank you for coming or tuning in to this town hall meeting where we dealt with matters relating to the Social Security Board. Thank you very much. Or maybe they still have over there. And Robert Premier, did I do what you asked me to do?
Yes.
No,